Hello, everyone. My name is Jill Ahlberg Yohe. I'm the Associate Curator of Native Art at MIA. It's an honor to be with such esteemed individuals in the audience. Words, I'm kind of tired. Words. Anyway, what I'd love to just share real briefly that this show was created. It was kind of a COVID baby. And it started when Jaida came to MIA as a Mdewakanton Fellow. And Casey and Jaida and I really wanted to work together to build Native photography in our collection. And so we knew that in order to do a show like this, we knew the people that could help us do this and the only way in which we do this. So what I'd love to do right now is I'd love to ask our council members, our curatorial council members, to stand, please. And I'd love for our community council members to please stand. Thank you so much. Today, this afternoon, we're on to the next major theme of the exhibition, Always Leaders. The theme is that Native people, artists, community members, elders, matriarchs, and other knowledge keepers have always been leaders in matters of environmental justice, social justice, understanding and championing the inalienable rights of land, water, air, all living beings. Native nations uphold sustainable political, cultural, and economic systems through democratic principles and consensus building. As ethical and philosophical leaders, Native people honor individual rights of self-expression and identity. And since the 19th century, Native photographers have embraced the camera to manifest these values and create a more just and inclusive world. So for our wonderful panel, leaders themselves, we have Jolene, Rickard, and then we're going to switch the next speaker. It's Iyekiyapiwin. Oh, yeah, this is right, Tom Jones. And then Iyekiyapiwin, Darlene St. Clair. Sadly, Jolene couldn't join us. She just couldn't get on the plane. She was too sick. So, but she recorded her presentation, and we'll share that. I'll first introduce our three esteemed speakers. Jolene Rickard is a citizen of the Tuscarora Nation and member of the Turtle Clan. The Tuscarora Nation is part of the Haudenosaunee, or Six Nations. She is an associate professor at Cornell University in the departments of History of Art and the former director of the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program from 2008 to 2020. She has a BFA from Rochester Institute of Technology and a PhD from the University of Buffalo in American Studies. Jolene's first photo exhibition was in 1983, and she has continued to make work, theorize sovereignty, curate, and write about Indigenous art. She co-curated two of the four inaugural exhibitions of the National Museum of the American Indian in 2004. Her most recent curatorial intervention is Deskaha in Geneva, 1923 to 2023, Defending Haudenosaunee Sovereignty. Jolene is on the editorial board of American Art, a founding board member of the Otsego Institute for Native American Art, and an advisor for GRASAC, the Great Lakes Alliance for the Study of Aboriginal Arts and Culture. Tom Jones is a Ho-Chunk artist, curator, writer, and scholar, and educator, and scholar. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Master of Fine Arts in Photography, and a Master of Arts in Museum Studies from Columbia College in Chicago, Illinois. He is currently Professor of Photography, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Jones's artwork is a commentary on the identity, experience, and perception of American Indian communities. For the past 25 years, he has worked on ongoing photographic essay on his tribe, the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. His current work, Strong, Unrelenting Spirits, are portraits of tribal members, which incorporates beadwork directly onto the photographs. Jones co-authored the book People of the Big Voice, Photographs of Ho-Chunk Families by Charles Van Schaik, and we heard some of that with Amy Lonetree this morning. He is the co-curator for the exhibition and contributing author to the book For the Love of His People, the Photography of Horace Pula for the National Museum of the American Indian. His current book project is dedicated to Ho-Chunk baskets and their makers. His artwork is in over 40 public collection, most notably NMAI, Polaroid, Sprint, Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, NIA, Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, Museum of Contemporary Photography, Microsoft, Jocelyn, Denver, continues, what day is it? Iyekiyapiwin, Darlene St. Clair, is an associate professor at St. Cloud State University, where she teaches American Indian Studies. Her work focuses on several areas: Dakota studies, Native nations of Minnesota, the integration of Native cultures, histories, and languages into curricula and educational institutions, the arts and cultural expressions of Native people, Dakota places and sacred sites, and anti-racist pedagogy. She is Bede Wakantuan Dakota and a citizen of the Lower Sioux Indian community in Minnesota. So we welcome these wonderful speakers today, and I think the next thing is for me to leave so that we can have Emily do the real work.
Good afternoon. My name is Jolene Rickard, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you via Zoom. My apologies for not being able to be in the room. I'd like to extend my thanks to the curators and staff at the Minneapolis Institute of Art for instigating and creating this provocative exhibit, while at the same time acknowledging their continued dedication to the representation and critique of Indigenous art. I'd like to share with you today a project that I believe defines leadership in the modern era, but certainly in the 20th century leading into the 21st century. It's about a title holder from the Cayuga or Gaikono Nation who carried the title of Diskahe. The Cayuga people were forcibly dispossessed at the onset of the formation of the United States under the Genocidal Act of the Clinton-Sullivan campaign. Their people were forcibly displaced and pushed primarily to the Oswegan community across the river in what is now the settler state of Canada at Six Nations. But this exhibit, a 60-panel exhibit that was installed at the same time as the emirate that is today part of the Indigenous dialogue at the League of Nations in the United States as well as in Switzerland. This particular exhibit was mounted as a 60-panel outdoor exhibit along the Lake of Geneva in Switzerland this past summer. It was accompanied by official diplomatic acts with the city of Geneva and the UN. Due to the time, I'm going to focus specifically on the role of photography in this exhibit. The work, as a curator, I had a very small archive of images from this period of time to work with on Tuscarora. And one of the key issues I recognize is that at the period of time that Tuscarora was working in, first quarter of the 20th century, the legibility of indigeneity was really more consistent with the eagle feather bonnet. The subtle shift that I made today is privileging and foregrounding the use of the Gestoa as the way in which our people represent ourselves. The exhibit actually covered an exhaustive and thorough analysis of the kinds of interventions that Indigenous peoples have made in the international arena in defense of our sovereignty. The photographic issues that I dealt with in the exhibit were primarily the romanticization of the figure of Tuscarora in contrast to the important political intervention that this title holder made on behalf of all of our people, but specifically on this concept of sovereignty. I'd like to share with you an example of the key photograph that really defined this moment. Tuscarora was rebuffed, and due to intervention by the Canadian government as well as the British government, the Haudenosaunee were not allowed space or time on the floor of the League of Nations in 1923. One could argue that we're still seeking this nationhood recognition on the international level, but I don't think that this has impeded or stopped the work that our people are doing to continue to forward our traditional governance. This particular photograph was taken on the steps of the UN at the city of Geneva in Switzerland with officials from the city government. But what I would like to point out is that it was actually the women of Geneva that pushed and advocated to magnify the Confederacy and Haudenosaunee's message at this moment in time. And so he was given an audience in Switzerland and Europe at large because of the advocacy of European and in particular Swiss women allies. And so this photograph was reproduced as a diplomatic gesture, but also as an activist gesture to demonstrate our continuity, that we haven't, after 100 years, we're continuing to do this work, and we do this work in allyship with not only other Indigenous peoples around the world, but with concerned peoples of all nations concerned with justice. And I don't think that this can be fully dramatized or fully understood today. But I think that we need to really work together as all people to seek justice, especially when we confront the difficult issues the world is facing today. And so one of the important dimensions, I believe, of the exhibit is to really raise the profile of the contribution of women in this work. One of the most misunderstood things about the Haudenosaunee is that women are co-governors in our governance. And this authority is actually demonstrated in the wampum belt that we see in the lower panel that is called the wampum belt is the Women's Nomination Belt. And this belt actually recognizes the role that women have in our governance. One of the ironies I found in my research for this exhibit is that there were 4 title holders of the title of Tuscarora, and I could not find a single image of a clan mother in a 100-year period. And so I believe that this photograph that I generated and took with Tuscarora, the contemporary title holder Steve Jacobs, with his clan mother, Carol Jacobs, is a significant photograph and a historic photograph where in the exhibit we recognize the co-authority of both title holders in our governance. One of the issues that we dealt with in the exhibit is the role of women in the resistance at Gunnasatage. And rather than bring forward the dominant military dimension of the resistance, we brought forward a key image of Ellen Gabriel with women from her communities, because it's actually the women in Haudenosaunee territories that are the keepers and holders of the land. And so this became one of the things that I tried to emphasize in the exhibit. And so sometimes when I'm curating, I'm actually looking for the absences or what isn't in the historic record. And so in this case, I tried to bring forward and actually generate and find images of Haudenosaunee women as an attempt to demonstrate that this work happens not only with male leadership, but it happens with women, the women in our territories. And so I contribute this modest understanding of leadership and history as a way of just underpinning that it's all of this history that's embedded in the installation that I contributed to the exhibit, Our Hands. The piece Fight for a Line is actually part of this long history and seeks to support the Gaikono or Cayuga people in their ongoing attempt to reclaim their homelands. Nyawa, and thank you for your attention this afternoon. Thank you.
All right. I first want to start off with acknowledging Jill. I was out at the National Gallery of Art, and the former director was talking to me about your last show, People of Our Heart. And what she said to me was that, yeah, Jill came to me with this idea of having this council of people come together and curate a show. And she's like, I wasn't sure about it, but I believed in Jill and I did it. And Jill is coming to this with a very native perspective and way of thinking in doing this. And she's done the same with this show here. And it's very important that our way of thinking starts infiltrating these institutions. I'm trying to do that myself. If you saw Amy earlier, the people of the Big Voice, the Wisconsin Historical Society had come to me and they said, we would like to do a book about the Ho-Chunk with the photographs of Charles Van Scoik. And of course, as a Ho-Chunk, I said to them immediately, I said, and you better have a Native American taking care of that and doing the book. And so I ended up heading the project. But it's so often that, you know, our stories are always told by other people. And so And it's the same thing, like Jada had said, and I'm so happy that we have young scholars and photographers coming up. Um, and the fact that she did this and she saw that there weren't books of native photography out there. I had the same issue when I was in grad school. And fortunately, Aperture's Strong Hearts was out there. So I had a little bit. And so that's how I got to know Horace Pulaw. And I happened to work with Nancy Mythlow, and she said, "Oh, I'm related to him through marriage." And those negatives are under a bed in Oklahoma weather without air conditioning, and they are nitrate negatives. And so, for those of you who don't know, they can spontaneously combust. So I said, we have to preserve those and digitize them for the future and for all. And so we did that for 2 summers. And but getting back to the people of the big voice, the way that I went about it was the way that Ho-Chunks work. We work as a community, and it's never about the individual. And so that's when I asked Mike Smudlock, who's here in the audience, George Greedier, who is our genealogist, and then Amy Lone Tree to write about our history. And then Matt Mason was a Yale scholar who wrote about Charles Van Scoik. And so we were able to get that accomplished in just 2 years. And my department chair came to me and he said, "You know, this doesn't count." And I was just like, I've always been, and I didn't care. I mean, I was producing enough work to not worry about it, but that's the way I've gone about it with all of it. We did the same with the Pulaw. And so I thank you, Jill, for bringing that to this institution and changing things. So, and that's one thing I've been trying to do also is I've been kind of stealing students, undergrad students from the Institute of American Indian Art. And we also have to honor Diani, which was one of my students who just got a MacArthur. So I'm very happy for her. And then another one is Henry Pear, who's in the show. He just got a Joan Mitchell. I think it's really important, and like what Jada is doing, that these young scholars come up, and we need more of them. And so that's one thing that I've been trying to do, get more grad students through that can go on and teach in institutions. So I appreciate that Mia's doing that with her scholar. And so when she asked me to do this thing about leaders, I'm like, what the heck am I gonna do? And so what I decided to do is when I wrote an essay about Pulaw, his father was a calendar keeper. This one, though, is in Mia's collection. And so, generally when natives talk, they're always saying we are oral history, we're our oral history, but we are also a visual history. We've had the petroglyphs, we've had these hide paintings, and they all tell stories. And that's what we're doing now as native photographers. So this is George Pulaw, which was Horace's father. That was a calendar keeper. And so Horace is, of course, doing the same thing. They would document what was going on. This is not his, it's just one I grabbed off the internet. But documenting what was happening, throughout the year. And this is one of Pulaw's. I'm sorry about I was grabbing things off the internet real quick. But he had documented his own people for the majority of his lifetime, and that's why I really wanted to preserve his collection. There was a woman in the 70s who had said, of course they wanted all the Indian-looking ones, the noble Indian, and he wanted to show those other ones of the parade and family shots, and he was not being recognized for that. So that's the reason why we had done that show with NMEI. But I just, also would like to honor the other photographers. When I started out now about 25 years ago, there was really only a small handful of us. And that's what I also appreciate Jolene, while I was still in grad school, brought me out to speak to her university. And then it's nice to see my cohorts of, Will Wilson, Sarah Sense, Erica Lord, and there's more, but, that are here today. Because we kept going. Of course, we weren't making, I think, the money that people are nowadays, but we kept trudging through, and it was our passion, and we just kept, doing photography. But again, getting back to the winter count, here's an example of Russell's, who's in the show. So we are keeping, these tallies and showing what's happening throughout the year. So here I'm just using an example of a ledger piece, along with Michelin's piece in the show. And of course, we're documenting our communities. And here's one of Johnson's, of a girls' baseball team, and Brian Adams. And so I'm going to be kind of flipping back and forth between these, petroglyphs and ledger art. I just kind of got into it as I started doing it. But then, Mercedes is projecting these images of family photographs onto it. And that's onto a pillow here, and showing, our own histories and how we want to be represented. So often, of course, we've been represented, with the noble Indian, Edward Curtis's images. But how do people start depicting themselves? And so, I really enjoyed Bentley Spang's photographs of family photographs and actual the negatives hanging from there, and a way, he's calling these war shirts, of protecting his own family, but at the same time showing our his own people through these kind of vernacular everyday photographs. And that's what's going to be interesting is when, and I think there are Native artists now starting to do that, where they're starting to mine these family photographs, and I'm really excited to see how that starts happening. This was a petroglyph in New Mexico. I just wanted to show the graphic nature of it, along with Dakota Mace, who is another one of my previous grad students. She's doing chemograms, and she's taking these symbols from weavings, Navajo weavings. And I believe these represent the four, concept of four, the mountains, Spider Woman. I can't remember the last one, but I know it's on the didactic upstairs. So here she's just using actual chemicals along with a digital negative and spraying it onto the paper. And I thought it was really important that we got some kind of alternative processes in the show. So that's why I suggested this one. Oh, you shut up now. And I'll go through these others real quick so we can. But I really also, and the next one is Virgil Ortiz. He's not really known for photography, but I started seeing him post these, and I thought it was important that he was in here. He comes from a matriarchal society, and so he was talking about how his mother had told him it was important that, how the women would keep these stories and share them, and it's the same, and they've kept their culture alive because of that. And that's one thing that one of my elders shared with me. He said, when those women are sitting at the other end of the lodge in the feast lodges, they're supposed to be listening, and because they are the ones that kept our community going, especially during times of war and the men were being killed off. It was always the women that kept those stories and songs for us. So they're always supposed to be listening. But we're also taught that as Ho-Chunks, that to always be observant. And then here's Will Wilson using the old creation stories of the twin heroes, and so he makes himself that. But again, thinking about our people, using those old stories, but also thinking about the future and what uranium mining has done to his community. And then here's Halea's, and I don't know how to, and it's Weiwa, um, um, gender mixing man from the Zuni. And I just, I had saw this image of the dragonfly also on there. So we're constantly, within each photograph, there's so much more knowledge and parts of our culture that are there that are that feed that information and knowledge, that it's not always shared. And then my last image is a piece by myself. Um, which is drawn from an experience of going out to Rosebud with my mother when I was a child. And the medicine man, Robert Steed, was doing a ceremony. And all these lights came in when the lights were off, and they started singing. And so for me, the beadwork is representing that, where our ancestors are still watching over us. And I had another experience with my mother where we had gone to go fast with a Cree medicine man. And the thing that kind of eased my mind, we're always concerned that we're losing our culture. And he said, we will never lose it, because if you fast and you pray, you're going to get those things, and your ancestors are going to come to you and tell you what you need to do. So that's it. Thank you.
Tami takiapi, ampetukinde, chante washte, nampe chuzampie, Iyekiyapiwin de mie, washichu ia Darlene St. Clair emakiapie. Damakota chanshaya pihemataha, wana chakpa ontue edwati. Ampetukinde, iuskiawanchiankapi. Hello, my relatives. I'm greeting you with a good-hearted handshake. I'm Iyekiyapiwin. My Washichu name is Darlene St. Clair. I'm Dakota. I'm originally from Chanshayapi, where they mark or paint the trees red, which is where the Lower Sioux Reservation is located. But I'm living now in the Twin Cities, and I just wanted to say I'm really happy to see you all here today. So I am approaching this concept of always leaders with sort of trying to theorize the way that, especially in this exhibit, but I'm thinking of Native art in general, that we see that we have an opportunity to theorize our artistic works in theory that's founded in our own traditions. So in this, in my presentation, I'm really going to be focusing and theorizing through Dakota Wichochan, Dakota lifeways or ways of life. And by doing this, I'm of course challenging the assumptions of Western thought. I want to say that to start with is that I'm very imbued in that Western thought. I studied art history and Native studies. And of course, the art history that I was taught, the art history that I was set into is a Western way of thinking about art and a Western way of doing art history. I am arguing that our worldviews hold particular meaning that have particular sort of weight and importance in theorizing our art. And that our wichocha, our lifeways, our ways of being, provide both guidance and the power to orient the way that we look at and interpret. I believe that this also is going to be addressing, like to theorize some work through our own ways of being is a way for us to sort of address the ongoing erasure of Native experience. All right, so if I'm thinking about Native leadership, I want to make sure you understand that to me, that idea is not grounded in sort of the Euro-American concept. I would say in Euro-American concept, we think of leadership as something that is that individuals, certain small numbers of people become outstanding through power and authority. I would say that for Indigenous leadership, they became important to communities, not through power and authority, but through responsibility. one of the things in Dakota Wichocha we really value is considered decision making. That means not even voting, not majority rules, that essentially we have to be so thoughtful about making decisions and that really requires very time consuming, difficult and challenging conversations to get to decisions that the community that we all, the Oyate, can be connected to. And then I'll say the central teaching, if there was anything that was hammered into my head as a child till today that still is there, that is to be a good Dakota is to be a good relative. So it is, we also know that our leaders ground us in our wichocha, our traditional life ways. Our leaders are grounding us in our ways. And our leaders prepare us for our future. So I'm giving you this as just some context to sort of get at what I really want to say, which is I'm using a Dakota concept to sort of theorize an approach to Native art, and in this case, Native photography. I'm using this concept of gapemini. Gapemini in Dakota really means twist or twirl, and its practical use comes from like twisting, twirling, like with a club, like this. But gapemini, it also has like deep philosophical meaning in the ways that we interpret the world. Gapemini is the way that it's often described, and it's often an image like this is shown. I want to be clear though, because I think if I didn't expressly say to you, you might say gapemini means mirror, and it doesn't. We have another word for mirror that is different. And in fact, the word for mirror, the way we understand mirrors, is really reflection in the water. So mani, or water, is in our concept for mirror. So there's not mirror. I think I want you to think more of, I'm going to show you this image, and I think, I'm going to start first and say, so one of the ways we think of gapemini is this teaching, this phrase that is often uttered, which is as above, so below. And essentially it's connecting sort of what is grounded. It is connecting what is in certain kinds of experience, that something similar is happening above. And that's very basic, and I'm going to keep getting into that. Here's an image that this is, I think, more instructive. So when I was being taught about gapemini, I was told that the teepee, or our lodge, forms gapemini. It gives that example. If we look at that and we see the as above would be that part that is the hide or the canvas, and the poles would be sort of that top part. Now that makes sense, I'm sure, to you because it looks very similar to this image, right? However, that actually, I want you to sort of try to get out of your mind that this is a two-dimensional image. So in many respects, this is better, because if we understand that, like, essentially the lodge is essentially like a cylinder that's been twisted. Does that make sense? If you take a cylinder and twist it, that's what I want to get at. That's what gapemini is. And the reason I say this is because this might look like it's two separate pieces that are actually touching. And I think what I want you to understand is this is like one of a whole. It's one thing that has been twisted to make that, but it's of one piece. Just like if you took a cylinder and twisted it, it would be of one piece, just with the twist. I think that's really important in the philosophical orientation I'm trying to get you to. So the first thing is that bottom part, that so below part, that part that I would say is I'm arguing that is a connection to our deeply rootedness. We are deeply rooted as Native people. That means, when I say that, I mean a connection to place, a connection to landscape, a connection to our relatives and all our relatives that live on the air and the water. You know, I was told another big thing that has stood with me is that our relatives are everything that is seen and everything that is unseen. So our deeply rootedness, our connection to Kunshimaka, Grandmother Earth, and all the things of creation, those things are centered in our oral ways of knowing and learning. We know our worldviews, our ways of seeing the world, our default orientations are imbued. These things are imbued in our artistic and cultural expressions. Those things are there, they're always there. We are deeply rooted because those traditional values, those wichoha, guide decision making. They create our governance, our systems of government, and they also create indigenous law. All right, so if we have this sense of like that bottom part of the gapemini is a connection, is trying to express our rootedness, our deep connections. And those deep connections are ancient before we even had an understanding of time, without time. That the top part of it is about futurity. And I would say, I don't mean when I say that, I mean modernity. I don't mean that this is about Native people or modern people, which they are, which we are. But I think it's beyond modernity. I think that this as above part of it is really highlighting the innovation of Native artists and Native people. And essentially that aspect is always drawing us into the future, centering our wichoha, but always future oriented. In fact, I'm arguing that our teachings themselves are beyond time. They're not a time that we can connect to in the way we think of time in terms of how old they are, how ancient they are, but they're also beyond our understanding of time in terms of our futurity, in terms of the things that have yet to come. And I think the other thing that's really important to understand is that within this idea of gapemini, it's one of a whole, it's one piece, but it allows for the twist. It allows for that twist, and that twist is really critical and I think important for us in reading Native art, is that twist is in that centerpiece. The twist is the center, and that tends to be sort of like the experience that we're having right now. I want you to understand that now I'm gonna be doing some audience participation stuff, so I'm really looking for you to get involved. So first, I want us to get back to gapemini. Oops, gapemini. All right, I think we should say it, practice saying it. So the K, the way it's written, it's more like a G. Ga, be, mini, gapemini, gapemini, gapemini. That's your two, that's correct. All right, so if we were to think of gapemini as a way to connect, to interpret Indigenous art, and especially this photography that we're looking at, I pulled just a couple pieces, and I'm going to be calling on you to sort of try this approach. Try this approach. In what aspect of this piece of art do we see a deep rootedness? In what aspect of this piece do we see a connection to a future, even a future that we can't imagine? And maybe there's some aspect that we see the twist. So that's what I'm looking for you to come up with. And again, there's no one right answer. As somebody who was really trained in Western art history, I think that I was sort of socialized into thinking that knowing about art was something that was for experts with very specific, particular expertise. You knew about one thing. And I think that I'm really trying to shift away from that. As a teacher and as a scholar and as an art historian, I'm trying to shift away from that, that way of thinking about art history. So there's not a one right answer. I'm really looking for your connections to this approach. So the first piece I'm going to show, I'll just say a little bit about it. I don't know that much about it, but in the exhibit, this piece spoke to me just really immediately. George Johnston Tlingit, he took this piece in 1941, and I don't know a lot more about it besides what I wrote on the label, but the piece spoke to me, so I want us to look at this piece. All right, who here is brave and will tell me if they think what aspect of this is connected to deep, deep roots, what part might be about the futurity, and what part is maybe the twist. No wrong answers. Yes? The landscape is the rootedness, and sort of assuming that this is a group of people that are connected to this land for a long time and have a relationship to this place. Yes?
And the kids are the future, but they're just a little naughty, so there's that twist there.
That smoking one in the front, in the back. I mean, part of it was when I saw the one with the ball that was like looking right at the photographer, you know, the one with she had the bat and the cigarette, so watch out. But I also love the way they're dressed. They're like cool chicks, right? They are the future of this community, but they're holding ground, right? They're holding ground. All right, so. Yes. And they're a baseball team, yeah. Or whatever. Yeah, they're a baseball team. All right. So you get the sense of the approach that I'm considering. All right. I have one more piece just to try it out. And then I'd love for you, when you see the exhibit, I'd love for you to sort of try this approach. I'm just trying it out. It makes sense to me. So this is Shelley Nero. I think Shelley's here. This piece, so I teach Native Arts and Cultural Expressions. I have shown this piece to hundreds of students over my career as a teacher, and it just gets people every time. It just has so much to say. So Shelley Nero, this piece is called The Iroquois is a Highly Developed Matriarchal Society from 1991. All right, I'd like to hear from some other folks. It's kind of hard to see. All right, I see a hand here. It's grounded in the tradition of beading, true. In fact, this beading, both the colors of it and the pattern of it is very grounded in Mohawk tradition. It reflects what they frequently refer to as a sky dome pattern, which is a reference to traditional history and origin. All right, anybody else? Yes? Laughter. Okay, what does that speak to you? In what way does this speak to you? It's a tradition. So in fact, this piece is grounded in laughter, grounded in humor, grounded in a way of being in the world that helps you survive. Very good, thank you. Other folks? It is referenced very much. In fact, this comes from a series called Mohawks in Beehives, which is also, sort of references that sort of humor. And she's really known for that in her work. And that's one reason that my students always just connect and are inspired. And this is, a lot of non-Native students too, who are really, so I want to thank her for her great body of work. All right, I wanted you to just get a handle, just a sense at what I'm thinking about as Gapemini, as a way to sort of theorize and interpret Native art that comes from Dakota, in this case, Dakota traditions. So, wo biratanka Iyekiyapiwin, I'm grateful to you all.
I forgot to ask our artists to stand up. All of our artists who are here, can you please stand up? Woo! So we only have about 5 minutes. So we're going to ask the audience if there are any questions.
I have a question about your design for the Gapemini. they touch in the middle. I heard from a Jewish friend of mine that the Jews combine those from heaven and earth coming together, and that's where you get the Jewish star. And I was kind of wondering, where we get that in our culture. Is that part of the design that we have? I noticed that's a lot of our beadwork. I noticed.
Well, I mean that as above, so below is a connection to what is here on earth is replicated in the sky, in creation, in heavens, in the world that's not this one.
I like to reverse that thought and say, because we're trying to come back to where we came from, because we want to be those kind of ideals and get back to where we are, because we're all going to be there someday.
Yeah.
Not here. This is we're trying to be, in a literal sense, we're physical here. We're spiritual beings living in physical bodies, but eventually we'll get to that point where we will be there.
And we do have that belief already. Dakota people believe that we come from the Oyate, the Star Nation. So we come from the stars originally, and we travel down this road.
Yes.
We all travel down this road because your sort of spiritual part of your being travels down to get born, travels back up when you die. So this road of the spirits would be kind of Wanachita Chanku. This road of the spirits is something that is really part of that Gapemini understanding. Sure. Thank you for your question. I mean, people will be very literal about it and say a thing happens here, the same thing happens there. People are very kind of literal about it. I feel like one of the things that I appreciated about going last is that I felt what Jolene said and what Tom said was really just giving evidence to sort of what I was saying, or providing a foundation so that when I gave my talk, I felt like it made much more sense after coming after you and Jolene. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed about this panel is that you're all teachers and professors, and I think that there's a lot of generosity in your practice. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Can you talk about, some of the fears that maybe the general public might have about, kind of opening these spaces and centering Indigenous ways of knowing and concepts within these institutions, and how that might leave other people out of the conversation, but we know that's not true.
I love that last little bit. You know what, even though I work for an institution, it doesn't mean that I agree with the institution. And so, like I said earlier, for the people of the big voice, I chose not to write any footnotes. And so the Wisconsin Historical Society said, you need to have footnotes. And I said, no, I'm doing this in an Indigenous way. And what I did is I wrote down everything and where I got that information from inside my essay. But what was interesting is Amy's was an essay, and Matthew Mason's was an essay, and somebody else, and mine was a reflection. So I just keep kind of butting heads against those people, saying when they said that these books don't count. In any other place within the institution they count, but it's in our department, it's only the artwork that I make. And so, but that's why I just think it's so important that we continue to get ourselves out there. And so many of us are doing that as Native photographers, creating our own shows. And so I just keep doing that myself. And I don't even know if that answered your question, but.
I think one thing that I didn't bring up that's also a part of Dakota Wichocha's multiple right answers. And I feel like that Western dualism, right, wrong, true, false, yes, no, black, white, that if something's right, anything else is wrong. So I think that Western dualism is really not our friend, but it's something we've all been indoctrinated in. But if we were to really connect with sort of worldviews of Indigenous people, I think one of the reasons that this always leaders is this middle section is because we're sort of arguing that the answers to our persistent problems of today and of the future are, the answers to those are in Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous ways of life, Indigenous philosophy. So it is, and because those ways have been so deeply erased, I think it does require an intentional intervention of an institution like AMIA. And that intervention is that it isn't one curator who's the expert of this, of all Native photography, and that person will then sort of create a narrative that essentially the model that's been taken here and multiple times here is that actually you need to bring communities of people in that are bringing different approaches and different worldviews, that you're bringing those folks in, and that through considered decision making, you're going to come to something that's really powerful and beautiful. I think that's really what they've done here.
Hi there. Thank you for your conversations today. So I'm noticing just the word centering is being used quite a bit in lots of different ways. It's used in the exhibit from the curators' statements to the artists and scholars. And then it's also being used here in this conversation. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on this idea of centering, centering voices, centering visions, and this idea of twist is the center is very curious to me. And so I'd just like to hear more about that. And what exactly is that twist? Is that also change? What is that center? Thank you.
Because the things that she's talking about, I cannot share, our stories or our ways, but she is talking a lot of the same concepts that Ho-Chunks have, but we just don't let you guys know.
I would say that if you put a teepee together, it has to twist in order for it to be stable. There has to be that turn to make it be stable. So I think that twist is integral. It's part of it, and part of the structure, part of what makes it stable and strong. So we have to think of, like, sometimes we might have to twist our understanding of something to have a deeper understanding. So I would say that maybe the twist that we're experiencing right now is that even though Indigenous peoples, lands, and systems and institutions have been threatened by colonization, that the core is still there, and some of that is those sorts of orientations and worldviews. That if those things still exist, maybe the twist is that instead of ongoing erasure, which has been the colonial project, we have to erase Indigenous people. Otherwise, we're going to have to feel bad about what's happened to them. But to stop the erasure and say, actually, halt, we need to actually connect more deeply with Indigenous, not just Indigenous people, not just Indigenous knowledge, but Indigenous power and leaders. Because I think that this is not going to come just from non-Native people learning information from Native people. It's going to be coming from centering, not erasing Indigenous worldviews. And that's going to be work that Native people have to be given power to do. And like it's been done in this exhibit, I feel like all of these are evidenced in the way that they have created this beautiful exhibit. So thanks everyone who was part of it.
Okay, we're now going to have a 5-minute break. Okay.
I just want to say thank you for all of you.
Oh, it's Sam.
Each and every one of you who come here to look at our photographs. and to support Native American art. Thank you very much.
A 5-minute break, and then we'll finish off.
Y'all are so good. Thank you so much. Hamadakiapi, Matopajuta Machiapi. My name is Jaida Grey Eagle, and I am one of the co-curators on this project. So I am one of 3 co-curators on this exciting exhibition. I was very recently a full-time photojournalist. So if you've seen me out in community, you've probably seen me with my harness and my 2 giant cameras, probably running to like grab a photo. But you know, I just wanted to say that we could not have done this show without our curatorial council. And I genuinely do not know how anybody does this alone. So, you know, with our esteemed colleagues guiding us through this process, it felt really safe in your hands, thus the title of the show. So this panel is World of Relations, and that is Native people understand the living world holistically, choosing to act with deep respect for all forms of life and their interconnectedness. Land, water, the cosmos, and all living beings are relatives to be treated as family. And so I am going to read the bios for everybody on this discussion. Rosalie Fable is a curatorial council member, is a photo-based artist born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Drawing inspiration from her family history and Métis, Cree, and English heritage, she uses a variety of sources, from family albums to popular culture, to present a complex self-portrait of her experiences as a contemporary Aboriginal woman. To date, Fable's work has explored the relation of photography to issues of identity. Over the course of her long career, Fable's work has appeared in exhibitions in Canada, the US, and in other countries, and numerous institutions have acquired her artwork. A graduate of Ryerson Polytechnic Institute, Fable holds a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of New Mexico and a PhD from Carleton University in Cultural Mediations. Please give a hand for Rosalie.
I didn't actually finish my PhD, but that's okay. So if anyone's in the audience from Carleton, no. Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to the whole MIA team. It's been an incredible process, and here I go. Because I'm trying to compensate for not doing my PhD, I'm gonna read. So my artwork reveals my journey to understanding my heritage and my place within it. I looked to my family's photo albums, hoping they would reveal clues about my identity. I have made many bodies of work dealing with identity, using photography as my privileged medium. Through this journey, I have discovered that my experience is as complex as the history of Métis experience. More on this. As a young person, I was confused about how I fit into being Indigenous or Aboriginal or Native. You know, I had been told that I had Indian blood when I was a child, and I hadn't connected this yet to being Métis. I really wasn't sure what it meant other than the color of my skin, and it was a starting point that launched me further into searching. So this is work from an early age, I did in '96, which explores through family slides and snapshots my awareness of my skin color. And although it was created early in my career, the series explores key concerns in my practice. And I started to examine my background through searching through snapshots that my parents, primarily my mother, had taken in the early '60s. And I looked at the family album, hoping it would reveal clues to my identity. My parents valued their world and wished to share special moments just by pointing them out. And family snapshots, photo albums, and evenings spent projecting slides set the stage for my love of looking. This is my first day of a simulation. I did this in grad school, and I wrote it a simulation, and then I thought, oh, that's not how you spell it. So I wrote it out again, assimilation. So both versions exist, and I keep getting confused, but I like it both ways, and I think both ways are relevant. It was my first day of kindergarten, and I was learning to spell and reflecting on my awareness and understanding of the history of colonization. I later wrote this, although. So most of the images I chose to work with, or choose to work with, have me in them. And by revisiting these photographs of the past, I explore how identity is created and recreated through many different contexts, events, and communities. Belonging, not belonging continues this inquiry. The work also initiated the realization of the heroes in my life. This is my sister on the left, no, in the middle. And there are in the series strong women, my mother, my sisters, my aunts, my grandmothers. And I placed images of these women with warrior women from popular culture that in turn highlighted their quiet heroism. It wasn't until much later that I realized that I had been looking for acceptance, and seeing my place in the family and family photographs brought me home to myself. Searching for clues about my identity grew from and was influenced by snapshots, both by my families, and of my own. My fascination and love of family snapshots has held my attention for my entire life. I realize that I'm very privileged to have negatives and prints from my parents and both grandparents. This archive feeds my spirit. I feel a responsibility to keep my family alive through mining and representing them. The history of the Métis is complex and perplexing, even for many Métis individuals. Through my process of working with my family's archive, I've been able to work through this history, situating myself in the simple context of the family. Someone once asked me, this is my family snapshot. Someone once asked me what I was passionate about, and all I could say was Xena Warrior Princess. If my colleagues from the 90s might remember this. I created the Plains Warrior Artist, and it's modeled on Xena, and as well as the historical context of Plains ledger art, and I was from the prairies. These images depict my continuing struggle to find my place in the world. In Paper Dolls here, I tried on the stereotypical idea of what an Indigenous person was, a woman was, but there were no paper cutout dolls for Métis. So, and I awoke to find my spirit had returned. I wake up as Dorothy. Just returning from Oz, and Dorothy followed the yellow brick road to make her way home, and I was traveling the red road, searching for my home, for my way home. In this image, I'm covered with a Hudson's Bay trading blanket, and this is referencing my family's fur trading history. And the wizard standing in the window is Louis Riel, who reputedly said, "My people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awake, the artist will give them their spirit back." And what a difference 100 years has made. Louis Riel was the leader of the Métis resistance and defender of mixed heritage people. And the Métis are a distinct people, and this began when Louis Riel in the 1880s defended those of mixed Indigenous and European heritage in the Red River area where I'm from. He defended it to his death. The Canadian government sent out the army to find him, hunt him down, and hung him in 1885. That's not in my script, but you can't leave that out. But in here, I'm having fun and awakening. So, referencing the Wizard of Oz and featuring Métis leader Louis Riel, the work expresses the desire to go home, and while at the same time questioning where home is. And in this, the Wizard of Oz, there's the message, there's no place like home, and everything that we need is right here inside of us. And all roads for me lead to home, and my family is my home. My road is to be true to our people and to uphold our pride and culture. In this photo collage titled "The Collector" or "The Artist in Her Museum," I insert myself into the Charles Wilson Peel's 1822 painting, "The Artist in His Museum." And Peel's painting illustrates the 19th century natural history and museum practices, including collecting Indigenous peoples and artifacts. So to disrupt this colonial view and to honor the spirit of my ancestors, I included aspects of my cultural heritage in my own version of the image. And bringing my family back into the living world is an act that can be imaged and imagined through photography. For instance, snapshots from family albums appear as a way to emphasize personal acts of collecting, and I'm inviting the viewer here into my world where Indigenous peoples claim the right to exhibit their own culture and history. The world that my grandparents lived in was recorded in black and white. Color was ignored or denied, muted. It was a world captured in snapshots and glimpses of the time before I was born, and I found these images to be full of evidence of mixed blood heritage, among other things. My nanny, or my paternal grandmother, left my family a powerful legacy through her extensive collection of photographs that depicted the Indigenous experience from an Indigenous point of view, or the Métis point of view. In Forging a New Path, Anne Fable, my nanny, who was born in 1896, these photographs stand alone as portraits of a strong, independent, and free-spirited woman. And I share my grandmother's love of photography and her desire to be photographed. I know she was directing whoever had the camera. She couldn't do a selfie, but so my work pays tribute to her continued presence in my life, as well as acknowledging her strength and sense of adventure. I was 18 when my nanny died at age 80, but she left her family an abundance of photographs of friends and family organized in albums. Some images appear like postcards because they're mementos of her travels. The sentiment of notes written and sent home to express what I imagine she wished for the receiver of the card. She wished they were there with her to share the experiences of travel. And in order to create a conversation with my grandmother and her past experiences, I combined photos that she had taken with contemporary photos of those places that I had taken. By merging these two photographs, I'm expressing my desire to see my grandmother's self-portraits in the context of my contemporary images of the places she had been. I see my series as paying tribute to her continued presence in my life, as well as acknowledging her strength and sense of adventure. I celebrate and continue my nanny's vision, proudly sharing my culture and history with wider audiences. My grandmother's photographs have been especially inspiring. What I remember of her is childhood memories mixed with the innocence of childhood, and she treasured her photographs of family and friends, keeping them in albums that kept her company until her last days. I discovered them decades after she was gone, and I'm still passionate about them and looking at them, and I search them to understand her and the complexities of the time she lived in. These albums are everything to me. They speak to me about who I am, my family, and my heritage. But more, they are part of the history of an area we all share and call home. Images from my family's albums indicate the rich history in my part of the universe. In Closer to Heaven, it depicts my father's life in the Manitoba's Interlake region and shows his formative years as a young boy and the many changes that informed the Indigenous lives of the period. This was a time when our families were trying to pass to fit into the mainstream settler culture. This mixing of cultures has always been a reality for the Métis. We both belong and remain outsiders. And that's my dad's brother as well, Doug. My family's history in the Red River area runs deep. My Cree grandmother met an English fur trader in the late 1700s, and my family's legacy continued. Stealing Home delves into the effects of colonization on my family history and the Métis through the government's issuing of script. Métis history differs from that of other Indigenous groups as we do not have treaty land, and stealing home illustrates the actual original script certificates and script affidavits that were used by the Canadian government and resulted in my Indigenous family and everybody else's rights to their land, their livelihood, their, everything. And in the background in the image, you probably can't see it, but there's farming fields, and that's acknowledging my mother's settler history. So I don't know if you understand what script is, but here, Métis people were given those things that look like dollar bills, and then by the Canadian government, and they were given lots of land, so 160 acres of land, or $160 worth of land. And the scrupulous people who stood beside those people, they had these certificates that meant nothing, had these affidavits, which are on either side there. And they said, we'll mark this X, or you sign your name or whatever, and here we'll give you cash. Not knowing they lost their land that way, and many Métis, that's how they lost it. So, and I actually, in the exhibition, luckily the government keeps all these documents, because in the archives, these actual documents were the ones that my great-great-grandparents touched, and that's their X on them. So, and I had to get permission from the Manitoba Métis Federation to let them out of the archives so that I could show them in my exhibition, the actual documents. But anyways, holding her ground acknowledges the legacy of my grandmother, making her claim to the land that Winnipeg was built upon. And I'm continuing to hold this ground and carry on from my grandmother and her ancestors, reaching across time. I'm grateful to my family for the many photos they have taken and preserved for future generations. And it's my hope that the work I've created over my lifetime will contribute to this rich family history. Walking through time anchors my family heritage with my parents, and their parents are on either side at the bottom there. And it includes a map of the Interlake, and then again, more script documents, and the DNA genetics. I worked in medical photography for a while, so those have special meaning for me, not really, but it's, let's see. So I did a small video, and for me, there was a certain period where my parents took slides, and so every, at night, like special evenings, we'd get the projector out and look at these. It was a family ritual where we'd sit and, for the evening, instead of watching Netflix, we'd look at pictures of ourselves and see our relatives and our family, and just reminisce and tell stories. Remember the time Uncle did this, and so yeah. Although these loved ones who are no longer living at the present, they're at these gatherings and remembrances. And then I also did another video called Blow. And this ritual of celebrating a birthday with a cake and making a wish and blowing out the candle is a tradition that's been around for a long time. And this it features photos of my family covering a period of at least 60 years. And this is my older sister, and that's her with her grandchildren. And this celebration is about the preciousness and fragility of life that is shared with friends and family. And like the medium of photography, the blowing out of candles marks the passage of time. And this celebration is about the preciousness and fragility of a life that is shared with friends and family. Yeah, the cake's the best part. There's a certain bakery in Winnipeg that we always, it's a family tradition too. Throughout my career, I've created work to reveal and sustain our presence. As Métis, we've been hiding in plain sight. And throughout my many projects and artworks, I have felt the coming together of my search for myself. And like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, as I depicted in the photograph, I awoke to find my spirit had returned. I always return to my family and our archive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalie. This past summer, when we had the opportunity to travel to Toronto to create media for the exhibition. Rosalie was so generous and kind and actually took me bead shopping. And I brag about it every time I get a moment to. It's my biggest claim to fame. So our next speaker is Rayanne Chartrand, Métis. She's a curatorial council member. So Rayanne is a Métis curator based in Hamilton with over 12 years of experience curating multidisciplinary and intercultural exhibitions, showcases, festivals, and programs for organizations such as Imaginative, Film Media Arts Festival, the City of Toronto, Harbourfront Centre, Art Gallery of Mississauga, the Aboriginal Pavilion at the Toronto 2015 Pan Am Games, and the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Most recently, she served as curator of Indigenous art at the McMaster Museum of Art from 2017 to 2023. Her curatorial work focuses on the praxis of survivance, relational aesthetics, representational politics, acknowledgement, and gratitude. Chartrand is a co-founder of the Shushikitu, I hope I said that right, collective and Métis equity seeking and advocacy group. Previously, she served as a board member with the Indigenous Curatorial Collective from 2018 to 2022, and she is a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Welcome, Rayanne.
So anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a big fan of public speaking, so bear with me. I'm just so honored to be here to talk about what I'm going to share with you all today. I feel like in some cases I'm speaking to a room full of people who have enabled me to do what I do, to do this research for the last 5 years, so it's a very strange position to be in. But it's also one I take with great humility and honor. So today we're going to talk about the Native Indian Inuit Photographers Association, which is a mouthful. So we just say NIPA. So what's NIPA? Does anyone know? There are some folks in here that were members of NIPA, so we're going to get into why NIPA was so important. This is a question I get asked a lot, and I often say that it's the Indigenous Art Service Organization that the art world forgot about. So the Native Indian Inuit Photographers Association was founded by and for Indigenous image makers, and it represented the coming together of photographers who'd largely been working in isolation. And so when they were putting together the organization, the two co-founders quite literally called up friendship centers and different places across the country to say, hey, are there any Native photographers in your community? We'd like to invite them to something. And so that first something was the first ever conference of Native photography in Canada, which was held in Hamilton, where I live and work, in 1985. And quite shortly thereafter, they incorporated on June the 20th, 1985. So you can see they wasted absolutely no time. They saw the urgency and necessity of this organization, and they got right to work. And what was really special about NIPA is that they really did set out from the get-go to promote a positive, realistic, and contemporary image of Native peoples through the medium of photography. This is quite literally their first organizational objective. And so this is pulled right from their incorporation documents. And this organization existed for over 20 years. And what's so bizarre is that we don't actually know very much about it across the Indigenous art world at large. But what ultimately NIPA represents is this coalescence of creative forces, of image makers coming together to do something together over this 20-year period. So a key question, who is NIPA? Who is NIPA? NIPA was really about the people. And so that was the following individuals. So the co-founders and co-directors were Yvonne Miracle and Brenda Mitten, both from Six Nations of the Grand River. And this organization really started in Hamilton, but spread across Turtle Island. Founding board members include both local, emerging, as well as professional Indigenous photographers, but also folks from further afield. And some of these folks have quite literally been our Indigenous art leaders, our art elders for the past 30 years. And these folks were founding members of this organization. It maintained an active membership over the course of its 20 years featuring photographers from across Turtle Island. These are some folks that are both represented and not represented in this exhibition, but there are probably over a dozen, if not close to 20 photographers in our hands that were at some point affiliated with NEPA, attended their conferences, received their newsletters, held membership. And so it's kind of bizarre that the art world at large doesn't know much about this Indigenous organization. But these are some of the folks that you see recur in the NEPA archive as active members and folks who attended events that they held. So how did NEPA serve? Well, NEPA served in a variety of ways. So as I've articulated, they held this first ever conference in 1985, and then subsequently for all of their years afterwards, up until 1996, they held these annual conferences. And that was really, as I'll get to in a minute, a moment to gather and to reconnect, reconstellate relationships and build new collaborative relationships. They produced traveling exhibitions. So here on the side are the front covers of their two first self-produced exhibitions, Visions from 1985 and Silver Drum from 1986. The front of Silver Drum is featuring a work by George Johnson, who served as the inspiration for that exhibition and the photographers that participated. So they produced these shows that actually toured across Canada and into the United States. So we had a bit, that Madison line did not exist for NEPA, and I'll get into why that may have been a challenge. They also operated a gallery space out of Hamilton, so member photographers could show their work there and have access to, just an opportunity to disseminate their work to the local Hamilton community, but then also to artists who were visiting. They operated darkroom facilities as well, so if photographers needed to develop their work, they could come and utilize the facilities at the gallery to do so. And that was built by Yvonne's husband at many of their office locations. They also ran technical and artistic workshops, so offering, again, the membership was this composite of both emerging as well as professional established photographers. So NEPA really didn't kind of pick favorites. We're only going to support the folks that are going somewhere. They also tried to really foster an interest in photography, and so they would host these technical workshops from everything from infrared photography to photojournalism to portraiture. So you could tap into that if you were a NEPA member. They also operated a quarterly newsletter, and what's really lovely about the NEPA newsletters is they're very frank and honest and funny at times, and it's this sort of conversation between the internal staff at the organization and the membership, and so there's this sort of back and forth as you read through the archive. But it was a way for them to stay in touch. It was a way to acknowledge new members of the collective. It was a way to talk about grant opportunities. It was a way to talk about technical developments in the medium of photography and access points for resources. They also operated a photography directory. So if a non-Indigenous organization wanted an Indigenous photographer, they could call up NEPA, and NEPA maintained a directory of Indigenous photographers across Turtle Island that they could tap into. And in the 90s, they launched a video production department, which really kind of served to be what they focused on through the mid-90s and into their kind of final years of life. And what's really special about the video production department is that they held in the mid-90s this event called Video Binge for several years. And the blueprint for that gathering, that Video Binge, is actually the blueprint for Imaginative, if you folks are familiar with Imaginative. And lastly, towards his latter years, NEPA kind of really contracted to Hamilton and no longer had the financial means to support this sort of hemispheric focus on Indigenous photography. And so they just really turned into more of a community hub. And so Tim shared this at last year's gathering. We held an online alumni reunion in conjunction with the exhibition I curated. And at one point in his comments, Tim said, there's power in convening, and that has stayed with me ever since. So here today, we are all convening, and there's power in doing exactly that. So here's a few of the convenings. So this is from the first conference in 1985 in Hamilton. So we see some of the characters who were integral to the founding of NEPA. Tim Johnson here on the left, moving into Murray McKenzie, who was the founding board president of NEPA, fabulous, incredible Métis photographer. Yvonne Miracle's crouching down there in the corner. Dorothy Chocolate, who's also part of the exhibition, is standing right behind her. Brenda Mitten is behind Murray with her mother, and just a variety of folks who are really integral to coming together in that year of 1985. NEPA didn't just only host conferences in Hamilton. They took their second conference to the Thunder Bay Art Gallery, and in this image, again, we see Murray, we see Valerie General, Larry McNeil, Shelley Nero, Yvonne's there, Martin Loft is there. Moving over, we have Penna Benita, Victor Macias was there as well. So some really foundational folks were convening and getting together and talking about photography at a really, really critical time. Fast tracking to the 90s. This is going to be a flashback for some folks in this room. So we see some really foundational photographers for you folks in the US. Lee Marvin's in this photo, Harry Thoma's in this photo, Richard Ray Whitman, Huea, who's here today. So folks convened in 1991 in Santa Fe for a series of conversations and workshops, and Low Pro donated equipment. So this photo was taken by Larry McNeil after that donation was made. I drank a lot of water. So what happened to NEPA? How is it that this 20-year history is just unknown or not talked about? It's known. When you start asking people, especially the folks that I've mentioned, they're like, oh yeah, NEPA was like this thing that we did in the 80s. And you know, yeah, maybe I was involved at one time. And it's there, but it's not, there isn't sort of a cohesive understanding of what NEPA actually did and what it actually offered. And that, I think, has a lot to do with what happened to it. And part of the issue with NEPA, and I don't want to kind of focus on the negatives, I want to celebrate what it achieved. But these are some of the kind of issues NEPA ran into through its history and why it really struggled to stay alive after 20 years. It fought to last 20 years, but it continued to struggle. And that was just because of compounding changes. So where I come into the equation, which is why I'm the talking head today, and not the members themselves, is I was gifted NEPA. It found me. I didn't find it. It just came through researching the folks that are in this show, and it kind of just became this thing that I ended up stewarding for the past 5 years. So this is from the first exhibition, this install of my former institution. This exhibition presented 58 works out of 63 that were collected by the Indigenous Arts Center out of that first exhibition, Visions, from 1985. And so this was the first presentation of this work probably since it was collected and since the exhibition had toured. There's a few works, however, in this show that are fairly iconic, like Shelley's The Rebel. Was part of this first suite. Shelley, thanks for that. But this show kind of really was the first foray into this work on NEPA. And then this show resulted, I thought I was done after this. I was like, yeah, I did it, talked about NEPA's founding, great. And then that is not at all what happened. More folks kind of started coming out of the woodwork and talking about NEPA and offering me their archives and telling me about stories associated with NEPA. And so this exhibition really was just kind of the launch pad for much more work. This is an image of us gathering at the first exhibition, #NoFilterNeeded. So we see Rick Hill, Pat Green, Brenda Mitten, Greg Stotts, myself, Jolene, Tony Grote, and Elder Renee Thomas Hill. So this led to my most recent project, which was last summer, which was called NEPA 2020. Hindsight's 2020. Yes, that was kind of an intentional title. But there were other reasons why that number initially made sense. So this was just an install view, and you can see we were able to represent quite a number of the NEPA members with this exhibition. So NEPA 2020 was the culmination of my 5 years of research on NEPA. We repeated the aesthetics, as you can see, trying to get as many. I was in my maximalist era. I was like, I want as many photographers and photographs shown in this show. But why I kind of took this maximalist approach was because we were able to actually save 360 photographs that had been sitting in crates in a Native Elders residence downtown Hamilton for the past 15 years, and no one knew they were there. So we were able to pull 124 of them, reframe, remat, and do some conservation work to get them out on the wall. And so we got 124 into the show. And with this project, we were able to represent 50 photographers, 50 out of those 120 consistent members. And in some cases, this was the first time some of these works were being seen in probably 15, 20 years. So it was really special, hence the maximalist approach, to making sure folks could see the breadth and diversity of not only the types of photography NEPA members were producing, but then also their interests and their concerns, and whether that was documenting community or landscape or doing abstract photography, it didn't matter. They were interested in it all, and that's what was really beautiful. So a final, why does NEPA matter? Why should we care about NEPA? Why have I been harping on NEPA for 5 years? Because it was an incubator, launchpad, and network. It was all of those things in one. And it didn't just cater to experienced photographers, it also catered to folks who were just interested in dabbling in photography, or folks who needed help developing their skills. It also served as a launchpad. If you look at who was involved, so many of those folks have gone on to have such prolific careers. It was also a network because it was about relationships and it was about community. However messy and complex and nuanced that is, whether it's local, whether it's regional, hemispheric, it created a lot of relationships that have endured through its services. What's also really amazing about NEPA is that it was founded and led by Indigenous women its entire history. So they worked really hard, and I hate to say it, but it might be part of the reason why it struggled with funding, a real devaluing of the labor of Indigenous women. But they worked tirelessly to keep it afloat, even when it looked like it might not last, but it did. And till to this day, it was just recently eclipsed by Imaginative, but it's still one of the longest existing Indigenous art service organizations in Canada. So that's a pretty big feat, even though it disappeared in 2005, 2006. And it still exists legally speaking. So someone was asking me what's going on with NEPA. It's still, they didn't actually unincorporate. So if anyone wants to restart the organization, you can. And talk to me if you want to. So it still exists, so it could have a new life. And why I chose to do this research, why it's important, is as a younger scholar, as somebody who's interested in photography, it was a whole chunk of history that I knew nothing about before starting this process. And so my mission has been to effectively write this history back into our art history books, and honor the folks that have been involved in its history, and its birth and its life and its death. But it could be revived. So let's end on a positive note. So just merci miigwech for being able to share a bit of NEPA with you all, even though there's NEPA people in the room. So if I said anything wrong, my apologies. Miigwech.
I remember when we were first starting to have these conversations, Rianne reached out to me and was like, "Are you good?" And I've told you before, but I just wanted to say in front of a live studio audience how much I appreciate your big sister energy. So thank you so much. Miriam Marnie Zafar, Lenape, African American, Jewish, is a part of our community council member. Marnie is a graphic designer and a visual strategist working in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her design consultancy focuses on graphic design and branding for museums such as the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, nonprofit companies, and B2C and B2B for small business. It is federal, state, and city certified as a minority and woman-owned business. Her traditional and contemporary approaches convey intent and clarity and encompass print, catalog, and book design, editorial writing, and copywriting. photo shoots throughout the US, Europe, and Africa, logo design and branding strategies. Her partnerships have resulted in initiatives that benefit each organization separately and collectively, and strengthen relationship building with various cultures and socioeconomic groups, in particular the Native American and African American communities. Recent achievements include the design and production of the 2022 and 2024 Traveling Library Exhibition, Indigenous Appalachia, originating at West Virginia University, and recognition as a design consultant for Hearts of Our People. Its book design was part of the citation for the Choice 2019 Award for Outstanding Academic Title. She was board member and board chair for 10 years at McGeezy, with the founder, executive director, Laura Waterman Woodstock. She is a board chair of Rosie Simas Dance and serves on the boards of Milkweed Additions and Redesign. She is a graduate of the Cornell University's College of Architecture, Art and Planning. She was a MIA Collection in Focus guide for 12 years, specializing in the Americas, photography, Japan, Korea, and contemporary modern art galleries. Please welcome Marnie.
He, which in Lenape actually means hello, and has now just become in normal language. My talk really is going to be about how I am as a collection and focus guide and now a MIA guide. I am usually one of the first people that most visitors will see when they are coming for a tour. Okay, spacebar. There we go. So during my tours, whether it be Americas or photography or Japan, Korea, I usually can get a sense and a feeling as to, who are these visitors today? One of the things I realize is some people really come with preconceived notions. Some people have no idea why they're here. They've been dragged here, or they really do want to come and know more. And I think what's really important for me and for how I represent MIA is to be able to open their eyes to what they're actually looking at. With respect to photography, I think what's very interesting is with the whole issue of native photography is one of the things that usually comes up is, oh, well, I've seen Curtis. It's like, okay. And with photography in particular, I really sort of pull people back and explain who Curtis was, what his work represented, and also Walter McClintock. And what he was doing at that time. Both of these photographers were in many ways romanticizing the vanishing native. And well, with respect to Curtis, obviously he staged things, and yes, he had permission, but it was all about the image. With McClintock, slightly different. He actually was adopted by the Blackfeet Nation and lived out there for several decades. And his thing was always to show it what they were. It was interesting doing my homework, realizing that the Blackfeet Nation actually wanted him to show pictures of them in the here and now as ranchers and farmers, which he absolutely refused to do because that was not what he told them people in the East wanted to see. I have this wonderful quote that I found by Will Wilson. Thank you very much. And I think it says a great deal about the equitable distribution of power and how, yes, it is in our hands now. So the history, people think Native photographers, what? They were doing things? Yes, they were absolutely doing things. And this is one of the things I'm always speaking to when I'm in any of the galleries is trying to give someone a grounding. Many of us as guides, we have our iPads with us at the ready, and quickly going through, these are some of the what I call the legacy photographers, grandfathers and a grandmother here from the very beginning, of which in our show, we do have a Haldane, we do have a Thrussell, we do have Cobb, we do not have a piece of John Leslie's. And finding a picture of him was really interesting because he actually was at the Carlisle Indian School. And his work, he took it upon himself to learn photography and to set up a darkroom studio. And I think what is very sad is trying to find any of those photographs that he did then. It was just like, I think I have to do a deeper dive. Here are some of their pieces. I love this particular piece of a First Nations man, very proud, very regal, really showing the majesty that he felt of his own people. The one of Curly by Richard Thrussell, it was curious because I didn't even know certain pictures like this existed. And of course, Jenny's work is just remarkable because she literally was documenting how Cherokee women and Cherokee people were in Oklahoma, when very few people were showing them in the here and now. And that was really important for her to show educated. And of course, that raises the whole other issues of the assimilation of wanting to be part of the greater majority. So going into the 20s and 40s, we have Peter, we have Horace, and then we have someone very little known, Jean Fredericks, who's Hopita. And this picture of him was actually taken by the friend who he was taking a picture of. And what's very interesting is amongst the Hopita, they do not necessarily want their pictures taken, though he was taking pictures of his people for them. And you can find some things that people have gifted throughout the Southwest, but not many. What I love is I found this picture of Peter's child in his kitchen. And of course, we have this piece by Horace of Ulame. What I loved about Horace's work, and truly, Tom, just so amazing that you've done this, is he really was documenting so many of the tribes throughout Oklahoma, not just his people, but throughout Oklahoma in all that they did, whether it was in their regalia, whether it was at family meetings, whether it was at community events. He really felt it was important to show the entire breadth and depth. And one of the reasons I'm showing you people such as this, as we go into the 50s and the 90s with Victor and Lee, is the fact that many people literally come to see work by Native photographers, and it's like the big, oh, really? They really feel that they weren't there. They weren't documenting anything. We have white men's moccasins upstairs. This is Owen Sumtoa. Jill and I were discussing how there is not a picture of Owen, but he took these images of his places, and they are, I've seen some of them, they're amazing. They make Ansel Adams look like, oh, he obviously must have studied these, because the work is just, you just take a deep breath and you swoon. So when I get into many of this and I'm showing this to people when I'm in the galleries, it is really an opening their eyes to the fact that it's not just this work that you see now. There is a real history, a real legacy to the work that is. And that raises a lot of discussion, obviously, of which hopefully, if I've done my homework, I'm able to answer most of the questions. So I have a piece here and a quote from Hulea. And this exhibition, I am more than proud to have been part and to have been asked to be part of the team and to have worked with Casey and Jill and Jaida and, well, compadre Justice, who has been fabulous. And I think what is really remarkable is the fact that this show is happening, and it is happening through the power of everyone working together on it. So I usually start with grounding people when they come into the galleries as to what exactly are they going to see, what are the themes, what is it? So it allows them to sort of, oh, okay, I know kind of what I'm going to be seeing here, and to sort of bring into them what is happening. I'm just going to go through these quickly because some of you who've been through the galleries have seen these. A great deal of the time, I will do a compare and contrast, and I will speak to what is happening in one versus the other, because a lot of times, you know, unlike painting or even printmaking or sculpture, people, they're more familiar with it, they're more comfortable with it, they sort of, for lack of a better term, in quotes, get it. Where with photography, sometimes they're not sure, okay, so what is it saying? What is really happening here? And so discussing the artists and what they're doing and what their techniques are in an overarching way. Every once in a while, I'll get someone who'll really want the details, like, oh, well, what is a gelatin print? Well, okay, then I have to go dive deep and explain it to them. But then we go into things of this nature, which will be in the galleries. And I know I will get this. I will have this incredibly powerful photo, which is almost mythic, from Cara Romero. And then I will then have someone who will see this collage by Henry Pear and just go, okay, you know, there'll be a quizzical look on their faces, and it will be the discussion as to what exactly Cara is doing with her representation within a photo versus what Henry Pear is doing. And, you know, the discussions can be pretty interesting. Sometimes I will have certain pieces selected and I'll only get through 3 or 4 because they'll get very, people will come from many different places as to what they're seeing. And what I feel is no question is a bad question. All questions are good questions. And I let that happen. This is another compare and contrast in terms of place and what is happening. This piece, David Little, I was going through our works in MIA and found we had this phenomenal David Little. And his view of what it meant to be Native and serve in the military. And this collage-like photo contrasted against Frank's, Big Bear's, where he is just getting all the community. There's like almost a cacophony of all these images coming at you. But when you go into each one, they each have a certain story. So sometimes people will just gravitate to one image, but then they may want to know, okay, but why is this one here? Or why is that one there? So for me, it helps to know more about what the photographer is saying, is meaning, is hoping to spark what conversation, as well as, okay, why are these similar or relate to each other? And so as a guide, I'm sort of here to help them navigate the understanding of what they're seeing. A real favorite of mine right now, Sharon's beautiful picture of walking for water, contrasted against Jeffrey Thomas's. And they are both speaking of the relationship, the spiritual nature almost, of water, food, life, that is of full meaning and cannot be separated from one who is Native. So knowing the backstory of Sharon's and also of Jeffrey's and understanding all of those deeper issues and deeper concerns of how and what that means to be a Native person within the context of the greater world, helps the visitor that comes to us understand what they're looking at. I really love the contrast of Jolene, who is at Cornell, go Big Red, you know, because I'm a Cornell grad too, against Arthur's, which is a collage, and hers is a collage, but it's different because it's almost like a living thing that's moving toward you. And against Arthur's, which is very, very personal in a different way, because he's pulling together family and his community, and he's doing all these intersections of that, which is similar but dissimilar to what Jolene is doing. So I'm almost like the guide that sort of helps people understand what they're looking at, but at the same time allowing them the grace of where they should be thinking about it and how that matters. These two portraits are just amazing. Murray Mackenzie, who was a NEPA member, against Tom Jones. I love these two pieces and how they reflect the people of those communities, but their heart and their soul, and you actually feel the person, but then understanding how they connect to their communities, but how the photographer reached in and pulled that out so that you feel it. Sometimes it's only about feeling, and me letting the people know that that's sometimes all that's needed, and you don't have to go any further. I think what's interesting for many people who most likely will come to this exhibit, and I have seen it when I've toured the Americas galleries, they come with many stereotypes, and dispelling those stereotypes by really leading the information, I would say, letting them understand what they're saying and how they're saying, but also why they're saying it. For many, I will get the thing of, well, that's what I was taught. Well, that's understandable. They would come to something like this when we had Virgil's pieces up. Oh, that just sparked everything. You know, how can this be whatever? But then explaining what it represented, how it framed a certain kind of conversation within Virgil's community and within the women within his community, versus Meryl, who is really speaking in a different way, but also as a Native woman. So all these conversations come up when I'm in the galleries, and I would say a lot of times it's a lot of listening and a lot of intuiting what are they really asking me. And, you know, sometimes I just take it as face value. I'm always surprised sometimes with what people come up with and why they come up with it. And I think for me, the best thing is just to let them think of what they are bringing to it before going into what the artist is bringing to it. Because I think they're both important because they are art mediums. It's different than when you're looking at a true document of a specific event or place versus things that are really pushing the artistic boundaries of things and being more conceptual in terms of where you are coming from. And then of course, this piece by Joseph Allen, which was actually taken at MIA at night. And I remember seeing it when I first got here, and Joseph was, there was an art fair, and he had this print, and I said, oh, I must have this print. But I love the fact because it was really speaking to, we are still here, we are here, we're still here. And that gets to the real heart of the matter. So for me, and for all that I work with and through in terms of the curators here, in terms of other guides, and even with the visitors that come, because I learned from them in terms of how I may need to be a guide here at MIA, all of it comes into play. So I leave you with this. in terms of what I am very excited about this show is Native photographers are front and center, and that this show, I get chills. I'm so proud of this show and that all that was done for it, because it is incredibly powerful. And this is a wonderful quote that, thank you, Shelley, when I found this, because it really encapsulates how this show is and how the Native photographers we have presented are really right there, and literally they're telling the story. No one else is telling the story. They're telling the story. And that's perhaps the most important of all. And I say Wanishi, just may the way be beautiful for you. Thank you.